Woman with the Revolver by Arthur Conan Doyle. Many years have passed since these events took place, and yet I still fear to speak of them with absolute frankness. Previously, I could not touch upon this case at all. It has become possible only now, when the heroine of the story has departed from us to stand before the High Judge. I shall, however, conduct my narrative with caution, so as not to tarnish anyone's reputation. We are dealing with an event unique in its kind. Nothing like it had ever happened to Holmes and me, either before or since. The reader will forgive me for not revealing the exact time when all this occurred. I do so intentionally. No one must know the identities of the persons involved. One evening, Holmes and I went out for a stroll. It was a cold, frosty winter night. Upon returning home, Holmes lit the lamp and, by its light, saw a card lying on the table. He picked it up, read it, and tossed it to the floor, his face clouded with loathing. I retrieved the card. It read, Charles Augustus Milverton, Agent, Appledore Towers, Hampstead. Who is this? I asked. The worst man in all of London, Holmes replied, sitting in the armchair by the fireplace and stretching out his legs. What is written on the back? I turned the card over and read, Will call at 6:30. Charles Augustus Milverton. Yes, he is to be expected at any moment, Holmes grumbled. I have often visited the zoological gardens, Watson, to look at the serpents. Oh, what a repulsive sensation. Have you seen the snakes, Watson? They are slimy, smooth creatures. Their eyes prophesy death, and their faces are flattened and wicked. That is exactly the impression Milverton makes on me. In my time, I have dealt with 50 murderers, at the very least, but not one of them inspired such revulsion in me as Milverton. And yet, I must deal with him. You see, he is coming here at my invitation. But what exactly is he? I shall explain it to you now, Watson. He is the king of blackmailers. Heaven help the person whose secret or reputation falls into Milverton's power. He is especially cruel toward women. This gentleman's face is always smiling, but his heart is made of stone. He squeezes his victims dry. He drinks their blood to the last drop. He is, if you will, a kind of genius. He could have made a far better career for himself had he chosen to. His system of profit is remarkably simple. He lets it be known in the right places that he pays handsomely for letters that compromise wealthy or high-ranking people. He buys up this kind of merchandise in abundance. The sellers are not only valets and maids, but also high-society loafers who have made a specialty of adultery. In such cases, Milverton does not stint. For instance, I learned quite by chance that he paid a footman £700 for just 2 lines. Only 2 lines. And do you know what happened next? A very wealthy and noble family was ruined. Yes, my dear fellow, there is not a single delicate document in London that has not passed through Milverton's hands. There are hundreds of people who turn pale at the mere mention of his name. No one ever knows who he is targeting at any given moment. He never acts directly. He is far too rich and cunning for that. He has a multitude of subordinate agents. Sometimes he keeps a paper for years, only to suddenly put it into circulation. He knows how to wait and takes the absolute maximum of what could be taken. I tell you, Watson, he is the worst man in London. Imagine a brigand who kills his fellow man in a fit of rage. That brigand is 1,000 times better than this reptile, who tortures and torments people just to fill his already bulging pockets. Never before had I heard Holmes speak with such passion. But surely this man can be brought to justice? Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. Put yourself in the place of a woman who has fallen into his power. She could send him to prison for a few months, but she will never do it, knowing that he would still have his way and disgrace her name. No, Watson, Milvern's victims cannot afford to fight him. He might be caught if he tried to blackmail a perfectly blameless person, but that is unthinkable. Milverton is as cunning as the devil. Yes, my friend, he must be fought with different weapons, and I shall find those weapons. And why did you invite him here? Because a high-ranking client has commissioned me to negotiate with him. This lady has found herself in a very sad predicament. I am speaking of Lady Eva Brackwell, who was the belle of the last London season. She is now engaged to the Earl of Dovercourt. The wedding is to take place in 2 weeks. But the trouble is, Watson, that this devil has gained possession of several of her letters. These letters, addressed to a penniless young squire, were indiscreet. Mind you, they were only indiscreet. There is nothing truly serious in them. Now Milverton is demanding a large sum of money from Lady Eva, threatening otherwise to send the letters to the Earl. There is no doubt the wedding would be called off. This matter must be settled. That is my commission. I must bargain with Milverton. At that moment, the clatter of wheels was heard in the street below. I looked out the window. A magnificent carriage, drawn by a pair of horses, stopped at our door. A footman in livery sprang from the box and helped a small, stout man in a fur coat to alight. A minute later, this man was entering the room. In appearance, Charles Augustus Milverton looked to be about 50. He had a large head and a full, clean-shaven face. The most remarkable feature of his countenance was an unvarying smile, which seemed frozen there forever. Behind large, gold-rimmed spectacles sparkled a pair of cunning gray eyes. At first glance, Milverton seemed a very jovial man, reminiscent of Dickens's Mr. Pickwick. But this joviality was a mere mask. His smile was unpleasant, insincere, and false. The glint in his eyes was also unsettling, revealing something cruel, restless, and wicked. Milverton's voice was soft and honeyed. He approached with an outstretched hand, murmuring regrets that he had missed Holmes on his first visit. Holmes pretended not to notice the hand. His face became as still as stone. Milverton smiled even more sweetly, shrugged his shoulders, and began to remove his fur coat. Having taken it off, he folded it neatly and hung it over the back of a chair, and then seated himself. "And what about this gentleman? I presume the presence of a third party is inconvenient," he said, gesturing toward me. "Dr. Watson is my friend and partner," Holmes replied. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. I raise a question not in my own interest, but out of concern for your client. This matter is, quite delicate. Dr. Watson is aware of the case." "Excellent. Then we may proceed to business. You are, then, representing the interests of Lady Eva. Has she given you the authority to accept my conditions? And what are your terms?" £7,000. "And if that sum is not paid?" Milverton's smile became positively honeyed. "Ah, my dear sir, it pains me deeply to distress you. But if I do not receive that money by the 14th, the wedding will not take place on the 18th, nor ever after." Holmes reflected for a moment, then spoke. "It seems to me, sir, that you are exaggerating the importance of this matter. After all, I am familiar with the contents of these letters. I believe my client will follow my advice, and my advice to her will be to tell her fiancé everything. He will surely view this foolish business with the necessary indulgence." Milverton chuckled. "You evidently do not know the Earl," he replied. But from a fleeting look of dismay that crossed Holmes's face, I realized that he did, in fact, know the Earl very well. "But I fail to see what is so terrible in these letters," Holmes exclaimed. "Oh, the letters are witty, exceedingly witty," Milverton remarked. "Lady Eva writes quite charmingly. The trouble is that the Earl of Dovercourt is unlikely to appreciate them. However, since you feel otherwise, it seems we may conclude our conversation. This is, after all, a purely professional matter of business. If you believe your client is better off with these letters in the Earl's hands, then paying £7,000 would indeed be unwise." Milverton rose and reached for his fur coat. Holmes turned positively pale with suppressed rage. "Wait a moment," he said. "You move far too quickly. We have no desire to cause a scandal. This is an intimate matter, and it must be settled at any cost." Milverton settled back into his seat. "I anticipated that you would come round to that view," he murmured. "But I must tell you," Holmes continued, "that Lady Eva does not have great means. Under no circumstances can she pay the sum you demand. Even if you were to agree to £2,000, she would be left without a penny in her pocket. Therefore, I must ask you to moderate your demands. Take 2,000. It is the very most Lady Eva can afford." The smile spread across Milverton's entire face, and his eyes blinked merrily. I know everything," he began. "You speak the truth. The lady is by no means wealthy. But observe, sir, that she is getting married, and marrying well. She has relatives and friends. Let them exert themselves on her behalf. Let them purchase these letters from me. It will be the finest wedding gift imaginable. Give Lady Eva a packet of these letters, and she will be far happier than if she were presented with silver candelabra or a golden butter dish." "But that is impossible," said Holmes. "Oh, dear me! How very unfortunate!" Milverton cried, pulling a bulky notebook from his pocket. "None of these ladies seem to have anyone to offer them sensible advice. They take such a light view of financial matters. Look at this, for example." Milverton held up a small note. The envelope bore a coat of arms. This letter was written, "Well, I shall not reveal the lady's name until tomorrow morning, but tomorrow morning this letter will be in her husband's hands. And for what? Simply because, sir, she refuses to pay a paltry sum which she could easily raise by pledging her diamonds. It is a pity, is it not? Then perhaps you recall how the marriage of the esteemed Miss Miles and Colonel Dorking was broken off? Everyone expected a wedding, and then 2 days before, a notice suddenly appeared in the Morning Post stating that the ceremony would not take place. Says it not? And yet, for a mere £1,200, the whole thing could have been easily settled. Is it not a shame? And frankly, Mr. Holmes, I marvel at you. You are a clever, sensible man, and yet here you are, haggling over a few wretched pounds. Surely you realize that your client's honor and reputation are at stake. But I am telling you the truth, Holmes replied. We cannot find such a sum. I am offering you a substantial amount. It is better for you to take £2,000 than to receive nothing at all. What profit is there for you in ruining the life and happiness of this lady? Well, that is where you are mistaken, Mr. Holmes. I have my own calculations. It is to my advantage to disgrace Lady Eva, and I shall explain why. At this very moment, I have 8 or 10 similar ladies on my hands. If these women learn that I have dealt severely with Lady Eva, they will become much more cooperative. Do you follow me? Holmes sprang from his chair. Watson, get to the door. Don't let him escape, he cried. And now, sir, let me have that notebook of yours. Like a rat, Milverton scurried to the farthest corner of the room and pressed his back against the wall. Mr. Holmes, he exclaimed, turning back the cuff of his coat and revealing the barrel of a revolver peeking from his pocket. I anticipated you might attempt something of this sort. This is not the first time, sir. I assure you, nothing will come of this little scheme. I am armed to the teeth, and I shall certainly use my weapon. I know that the law is on my side. Furthermore, sir, your assumption is entirely incorrect. Lady Eva's letters are not in my notebook. I am not so foolish as to bring such documents to your rooms. Yes, gentlemen, that is how it stands. I have another visit or two to make this evening, and it is time I was home. As you know, Hampstead is a considerable distance. Milverton took a few steps forward, snatched his coat from the chair, and, with his revolver in hand, moved toward the door. I made a move to raise a chair, but Holmes shook his head, and I abandoned the intent. With a bow, a smile, and a wink, the blackmailer stepped out of the room. A moment later, we heard the crack of a whip and the clatter of hooves as the carriage rolled away down the street. Holmes sat motionless by the fire, hands deep in his pockets and his head sunk upon his chest. His eyes were fixed on the glowing embers. For half an hour he remained thus, silent and pensive. Then he suddenly rose with the air of a man who has made an irrevocable decision and disappeared into his bedroom. A few minutes later, a rakish young workman with a goatee and a visible air of intoxication emerged. Lighting a clay pipe from the lamp, the workman stepped out into the street. With a smile, I watched him to the door. I shall be back in an hour, Watson, came a voice from the darkness of the night. I realized that Holmes was beginning his campaign against Charles Augustus Milverton, But could I have foreseen the strange turn that campaign would take? Holmes disguised himself as a workman and left the house for several days in a row. He mentioned briefly that the destination of his travels was Hampstead and that he was not wasting his time there. That was all I knew for the first few days. But then one evening, a dismal, rainy night, when the water lashed against the windows, Holmes finally let me into a secret. Having returned and changed into his dressing gown, he sat by the fire and laughed heartily. "Tell me, Watson," he asked, "do you consider me a man suited for domestic life?" "What a question!" "Certainly not." "Then you should know that I am engaged to be married." "My dear fellow, congratulations." "Yes, engaged to Milverton's housemaid." "Good heavens, Holmes, what are you saying?" "You see, there were things I needed to find out." "But surely you've gone too far." "It was necessary. She knows me by the name of Escott. I am a roofer with a small business of my own. Every evening I take a walk with my fiancée, and we have the most charming conversations. Oh, you cannot imagine those talks. One way or another, I have achieved my goal. I now know Milverton's house, as well as the back of my own hand." "But what about the girl, Holmes?" I asked. He shrugged his shoulders. "It cannot be helped, Watson," said he. "What would you have? When the stakes on the table are this high, one must play every card that comes to hand. However, do not distress yourself too much over the feelings of that worthy lass. The fact is, I have a rival, and she will soon be consoled. Ah, what a magnificent night it is!" "What? You like this weather?" "Yes. This weather is exactly what I need. Tonight, Watson, I am going to burgle Milverton's house." The words took my breath away, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. Holmes spoke in a calm, steady tone, and I knew at once that he would not be moved from his decision. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. I vividly pictured Holmes in the role of a burglar. What could come of it? It was clear. We would be caught, trapped, and the name of a man who had lived his whole life with honor would be forever tarnished. Poor Holmes! To save others from the hateful Milverton, he might well fall into the villain's clutches himself. I could not restrain myself from speaking. "For heaven's sake, Holmes, think of what you are about to do." "I have thought long and hard about this matter, my dear comrade," he replied. "You know me, I do nothing in haste. I grant you that I am undertaking a daring and, if you like, dangerous business. But what is to be done if there is no other way? Let us discuss the matter properly. I presume you agree that my intention is criminal only in its formal sense. Morally, it is entirely beyond reproach. We shall rob him only to take back that notebook. After all, you yourself wished to help me with that earlier." I reflected for a few seconds. "Yes," I said, "we commit nothing immoral if we take nothing from him except those items which he uses for illegal purposes." "Precisely. Therefore, my idea is perfectly moral. What may trouble us in this instance is merely the question of our personal safety. But can a man of honor talk of danger when a woman appeals to him for help? But you are placing yourself in a false position. Indeed, therein lies the danger, the risk. But by what other means can I secure those letters? Poor Lady Eva has no money and no relatives to whom she can entrust her secret. Tomorrow, the deadline set by Milverton expires. If she does not pay, the scoundrel will keep his word and ruin her. What is left to me? Either I must abandon this lady to her fate, or I must make one final attempt. Between us, Watson, I look at this from a sporting point of view. A kind of duel has begun between Milverton and me. At the start, as you saw, he gained the upper hand. My pride is touched. I shall fight to the finish. I do not like this business, but if it must be done, it must be done. When do we start? I asked. You will stay at home. If I stay at home, then you do not go, I replied. You shall not go. I give you my word of honor, and I have never yet broken my word. If you refuse to take me with you, I shall hail a cab, drive to the police, and report your expedition. But I have no need of you. How can you know? You cannot foresee everything. One way or another, I have decided to go with you. I have my pride as well." Holmes was slightly annoyed, but then his face cleared, and he clapped me on the shoulder. Very well, comrade. So be it," he said. "We have lived in the same rooms for so many years that it would be no surprise if we ended up in the same prison cell. You know, Watson, I may as well confess to you, the thought has always haunted me that I might have made a very decent criminal. Now the moment has come to test myself in that field. Look at this." He took a small leather case from a desk drawer and opened it. I saw a row of gleaming instruments. Holmes began to explain. "Look here. This is a first-class tool for picking locks. See how cleanly it is made. You might call it the final word of science. And this little beauty with a diamond tip is used for cutting glass from window frames. The handle is nickel-plated. A charming little thing, isn't it? And here are the skeleton keys, again of the most improved pattern. The progress of civilization is evident even in the fabrication of burglars' tools. Besides all this, I have a dark lantern. In a word, everything is provided for. Watson, now tell me, do you have shoes that make no noise?" "I have lawn tennis shoes with gutta-percha soles." "Excellent. And a mask?" "I can make a pair of masks out of silk." "Aha! I see you have criminal instincts of your own. Splendid. Make the masks. We shall have a cold supper before we leave. It is now 9:30. At 11, we shall be at the Church Rose, and from there is a 15-minute walk to Appledore Towers. We can be at work before midnight. Milverton goes to bed punctually at 10:30 and sleeps very soundly. If luck is with us, we shall be home by 2 in the morning with Lady Eva's letters in my pocket. We both put on evening dress, open waistcoats and dinner jackets. This was to avoid suspicion. Any passerby would surely think we were merely heading home late from a theater. On Oxford Street, Holmes hailed a hansom cab, which took us to Hampstead. There we paid the driver, and, buttoning our overcoats to the chin, moved toward our destination. It was bitterly cold, and the wind pierced us to the bone. "This matter must be handled delicately," Holmes remarked. "The scoundrel keeps his documents in a safe in his study, and that study, Watson, is immediately adjacent to his bedroom, serving almost as an anteroom. Our stroke of luck is that Milverton is a heavy sleeper. These stout little men always sleep like the dead. Agatha, my fiancée, laughed while telling me about it. She said it is quite difficult to wake him. He has a secretary, a very devoted man, who sits in the office all day. That is precisely why I chose to operate at night. Milverton's garden is guarded by an unusually fierce dog, but I have already taken measures there. Lately, I began scheduling my trysts with Agatha very late, and to ensure I can walk safely through the garden, she locks the dog in the shed. Ah, here is the house. You see how large it is. Through the gate, Watson, and now to the right. We must head for those laurels. It is time, however, to put on the masks. There, you see, there is not a light in any window. Our affairs are going excellently. Having donned our black silk masks, we began to steal toward the silent, gloomy house. On one side was a long, tree-lined veranda, onto which several windows and 2 doors opened. "Here is his bedroom," Holmes whispered, "and this door leads straight into the study. It would be more direct to enter there, of course, but it is locked and bolted. It might make too much noise. Go further. We shall enter the drawing-room through this conservatory." The conservatory was locked, but Holmes skillfully removed a pane of glass, reached in, and turned the lock. We entered, the door closing behind us, and in that moment we became trespassers of the law. The heavy, warm air of the greenhouse and the sharp scent of tropical plants stifled me. In the darkness, Holmes caught my hand and led me quickly forward. Palm fronds brushed against our faces. After some distance, we reached the door. Holmes opened it, and we found ourselves in a large, dark room that smelled of cigars. Holmes possessed a remarkable, almost feline ability to see in the dark. He maneuvered skillfully between the furniture, and we soon reached another door. Where were we? I reached out and felt clothing on the wall. Ah, it must be a corridor. Holmes kept moving forward. He quietly opened a door to the right. Something sprang out at us. My heart skipped a beat, but when I realized it was only a cat, I felt a sudden urge to laugh. In the room we entered, a fire was burning in the grate, and again the air was thick with tobacco smoke. Holmes entered on tiptoe, let me in, and closed the door. We stood in Milverton's study. At the far end of the room hung a heavy curtain leading to the bedroom. The fireplace glowed brightly, lighting the room well. By the door, I noticed an electric light switch, but we decided not to illuminate the room further. To one side of the fireplace, a heavy curtain concealed the window we had passed on the veranda. On the other side was a door to the balcony. A writing desk stood in the center of the room, fronted by a swivel chair upholstered in bright red Morocco leather. Directly opposite the desk was a large bookcase topped with a marble statue of Athena. In the corner between the bookcase and the wall, we saw the object of our quest, the safe. The firelight glinted off its polished metal surface. Holmes crept across the room and hovered by the safe. Then, still observing every precaution, he approached the curtain, inclined his head, and listened. The bedroom was silent as a grave. I was occupied with my own thoughts, reasoning that we must provide for a hasty retreat. I approached the balcony door and examined it. To my great astonishment, the door was unlocked. I touched Holmes's arm and pointed. He actually started. He was clearly surprised by this discovery. "I don't like this, not at all," he breathed into my ear. "I cannot understand this circumstance. However, we have no time to lose. Can I help you with anything?" "No, stand by the door. If you hear footsteps on the balcony, bolt the door and we shall leave the way we came. If someone enters from the house and we have finished our work, we shall go through the garden. If we haven't finished, we hide behind that curtain. Do you understand?" I nodded and took my post at the door. My fear had vanished completely. I felt a strange thrill. I found I liked the role of the criminal. It was far more interesting than any of our previous adventures. After all, the crime we were committing was quite extraordinary. We were driven by a noble purpose. We were acting like selfless knights. Our opponent was one of the most undeniable and notorious scoundrels. In short, the whole business began to interest me immensely. I did not think of the illegality of our actions. I exulted, and the dangers associated with our venture did not frighten me in the least. I watched with admiration as Holmes began to take out his burglar's tools. He was calm, philosophically sorting through them to select exactly what he needed. At that moment, he resembled a surgeon about to perform a difficult operation. Holmes, as I well knew, was positively obsessed with safes. He claimed he could open any lock, and now chance gave him the opportunity to put his talents into practice. He stood face to face with a green, gold-tinted dragon that guarded the reputations of so many fair ladies in its maw. Holmes began to settle in. He rolled up his sleeves, hung his coat on a chair, and laid out a chisel, 2 drills, and several skeleton keys. I stood by the center door, watching both exits and ready for any contingency, or so it seemed to me, though in truth, I likely would have been quite at a loss had anything actually happened. For about half an hour, Holmes worked with extraordinary energy. He picked up one tool after another, wielding them with incredible skill. Any mechanic would have envied his dexterity. Finally, there was a metallic click, and the lid of the monster swung open. We saw packets of papers arranged on the shelves, many of them all tied, sealed, and labeled. Holmes took one of the packets, but it was difficult to read by the flickering light of the fire. We did not want to turn on the electricity. It was too great a risk with Milverton sleeping in the next room. Holmes reached for his dark lantern to read the inscription on the packet, but suddenly he lowered the lantern and began to listen. A moment later, Holmes quickly closed the safe, snatched up his coat, thrust the tools into his pocket, and lunged to the curtain by the window. I followed his lead. Only now, standing beside my companion behind the curtain, did I understand why Holmes, possessing a much keener sense of hearing than I, had become so suddenly alarmed. Somewhere in the distance, there was a noise, the slam of a door, We waited, holding our breath. The vague, dull thud gradually transformed into the rhythmic cadence of heavy footsteps. Someone was fast approaching the study. The door opened. Someone turned a switch on the wall, and the room was instantly flooded with light. The door was locked, and the pungent scent of cigar reached us. The newcomer paced back and forth across the room, walking quite close to us. Finally, there was a creak of a chair. The footsteps ceased. We heard a key click in the lock of the writing desk, and a second later, the rustle of paper. Until then, I had not dared appear from my hiding place, but now I finally resolved to part the curtain slightly. Holmes looked out as well. Directly opposite us, quite close, was a broad, stooped back of Milverton. All our calculations had been wrong. Milverton had no intention of sleeping. He had been sitting somewhere in a far part of the house, in a room whose light was not visible from the garden. In our field of vision was a broad, gray head with a large bald spot. Milverton sat reclining in his morocco chair with his legs stretched out. A large black cigar jutted from the corner of his mouth. The blackmailer wore a dandyish yet modest light-colored smoking jacket with a velvet collar. In his hands, he held a paper. It seemed to be some sort of legal document. He read it lazily, puffing out clouds of smoke from time to time. He sat quietly and comfortably, apparently with no intention of leaving. We were forced to stand and wait behind our curtain. Holmes's hand touched mine. I felt his encouraging squeeze. "Do not fear. All is well. We shall do our work," that handshake seemed to say. But I was in mortal terror. From my position, I could see clearly that the door of the safe was not tightly closed. What if Milverton saw it? I mentally decided that if the worst happened, I would leap upon the blackmailer, wrap his head in my coat, throw him to the floor, and hold him there until Holmes had done what was necessary. But Milverton did not look at the safe. He was entirely absorbed in his reading, slowly turning the pages of the legal act. When would this end? At one point, I thought that after finishing his cigar and the document, Milverton would go to bed, but he was not destined to finish the paper. Our adventure took a sudden and unexpected turn. Several times Milverton glanced at his watch. Once he even stood up, then sat down again with an impatient gesture. Was he actually expecting someone? The thought had not even occurred to me. It was so very late. But suddenly, quiet footsteps sounded on the balcony. Milverton stopped reading and straightened up in his chair. The steps became clearer, and finally, there was a cautious knock at the large door. Milverton rose and opened it. "I must say, you've kept me waiting. You're half an hour late," he said gruffly. Standing behind the curtain, we finally understood why the balcony door had been unlocked and why Milverton had stayed up so late. There was the rustle of a woman's dress. Milverton's face turned toward us, and I hastily pulled the curtain shut. Only after a few seconds did I dare to look again. I saw Milverton once more. He was sitting in his chair as before, his cigar protruding insolently from his mouth. Directly in front of him, brightly lit by the electric light, stood a tall, slim, dark-haired woman, her face covered by a thick veil. She stood wrapped in a wide cloak. The stranger was breathing rapidly. It was evident she was deeply agitated. "Well, my dear," said Milverton, "you have deprived me of several hours of precious nightly rest. I hope it has not been in vain. Could you really not have appointed a more convenient time for our meeting?" The woman shook her head. Well, very well. I see it was impossible," said Milverton. "Yes, my dear, I know the Countess treats you poorly." "Splendid. Now you can have your revenge. However, my girl, you are trembling. What is that for? Compose yourself, I beg you. There is no need for excitement. Let us speak of business." Milverton pulled out one of the drawers of the writing desk and, taking out a piece of paper, continued. "You say you have 5 letters compromising the Countess. You agree to sell them. Well, I shall buy them with pleasure." "Excellent, my dear, excellent. The whole question is the price, and to determine the price, I must see the letters. If the letters are truly good—" "Good heavens! Good heavens!" Milverton sprang up and exclaimed, So it is you?" The woman, without a word, unfastened her cloak and removed her veil. I saw a beautiful, dark, sharply defined face. The features of that face are well remembered by me. An aquiline nose, thick, dark, arched brows, flashing eyes, thin, tightly compressed lips, and a smile that boded no good. "Yes, it is I we heard. It is the woman whose life you ruined." Milverton laughed, but in that laugh alarm was clearly discernible. "Ah, madam, your own obstinacy is to blame," he said. "Why did you force me to resort to extreme measures? I am, my dear lady, a kind man. I wouldn't hurt a fly. But one must earn one's bread, must one not? You yourself, my dear, placed me in this position. Remember, I offered you a fair price, yet for some reason you chose not to pay." "Yes, I remember it all," the stranger said. "You sent those letters to my husband, and he could not survive the shame. You know that noble man is dead. A great man is gone, one whose shoes I was not worthy to unlace. You surely remember how I came here at night, how I begged and pleaded for your mercy. You did not heed my prayers. You laughed at me. Even now, you attempt to laugh at me, but you fail. I see your lips trembling. You are afraid, Milverton. You thought you would never see me again. But that night taught me how to reach you and how to speak with you alone. Well, Charles Milverton, what have you to say in your defense?" Milverton sprang from his chair, stammering, "Do you really think you can frighten me? I have only to raise my voice and the servants will be here. You will be seized, madam, and sent to the police. But I shall not cause a scandal. I excuse your anger, for I understand it. I shall limit myself to asking you to leave. I have no wish to speak with you further." The woman stood motionless. A murderous smile played upon her lips. One hand was hidden beneath the cloak at her breast. "Listen, Milverton," she replied. "You ruined me, but you shall ruin no one else. You broke my heart, but you shall break no other hearts. I shall rid the world of you. You are a venomous creature, Milverton. Take that, you dog, and that, and that." Standing just 2 paces from Milverton, she drew a small, gleaming revolver from her bosom and began to fire. There was one shot, then another, then a third. Milverton recoiled. He slumped against the writing desk, coughed desperately, and began to claw at the tabletop with his hands. Then he staggered. Another shot rang out, and Milverton fell to the floor. "You have finished me," he gasped. Then his body went limp, and he grew silent forever. The woman approached him, looked into his motionless face, and then placed her foot upon that face. But Milverton did not move. Involuntarily, I pulled the curtains shut. There was a rustle of a dress, a draught of fresh night air, and the avenger was gone. We, of course, could not have intervened to save Milverton from his fate, but I was terribly agitated. When the woman began to fire, I made a move to leap from behind the curtain, but I stopped. My arm was caught by Holmes. It was a cold, firm grip. I understood what my friend intended by that gesture. "Do not interfere in this business. Watch and observe. Let the scoundrel receive what he deserves. We have our own work here," Holmes seemed to say. The moment the woman left the room, Holmes moved quickly and silently to the door and locked it. Voices were heard in the house, followed by the sound of feet running through the corridors. The revolver shots had awakened the servants. Holmes, maintaining absolute composure, approached the safe and, grabbing a whole armful of letters, flung them into the fire. The door handle rattled. Someone was forcing their way into the room. Paying no heed, Holmes continued his work until the safe was completely empty. There was a loud knocking at the door. Holmes glanced quickly around and approached the desk. Upon it lay a blood-stained letter, the very message that had been the herald of death for Milverton. Holmes crumpled it up and tossed it into the flames. Then he unlocked the balcony door, stepped out of the room, and, locking it from the outside, said, "Follow me, Watson. We shall scale the garden wall and vanish." I had not expected the alarm to be raised so swiftly. As we ran, I glanced back and saw the entire house brilliantly lit. The front door was flung open, and human figures were racing through the darkness along the garden paths. The whole grounds were full of people. One of the footmen spotted us and, shouting loudly, gave chase. But Holmes, it seemed, knew the layout perfectly. He maneuvered skillfully between flower beds and shrubbery, with me following hard at his heels. Our pursuer, however, did not fall behind, and I could clearly hear his heavy breathing. At last, we reached a high wall, at least 6 feet in height. Holmes scrambled up nimbly and dropped down onto the other side. I followed his example, but at that moment I felt someone seize me by the leg. I made a desperate effort and, kicking my unknown pursuer in the face with my free foot, broke loose and found myself over the wall. In my haste, however, I fell face first into a bush. Holmes pulled me up, and we set off at a dead run across the Hampstead Heaths. After running nearly 2 miles in this fashion, Holmes stopped and listened intently. Around us reigned a deathly silence. Our pursuers were left far behind. We were in perfect safety. The next day, after a hearty breakfast, we were sitting in our dining room peacefully smoking. The bell rang, and a minute later Lestrade, the well-known Scotland Yard official, entered the room. The police inspector's manner was exceedingly solemn. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes, good morning," he said. "Tell me, are you very busy?" "Not so busy that I haven't time to chat with you," my friend replied. "You see, Mr. Holmes, a rather mysterious business has occurred in Hampstead. I have come, strictly speaking, to ask for your help in the matter. If, of course, you have the leisure." "Good heavens! What has happened in Hampstead?" asked Holmes. "A murder, a most dramatic and mysterious murder. I know very well, Mr. Holmes, how talented you are at dealing with cases of this nature. So I have come to ask you to drive down to Appledore Towers with me and give me your expert advice. An extraordinary crime has taken place. This man Milverton, the man who was killed, was something of a scoundrel and was under our observation. He was, you see, a collector of various documents which he used for blackmail. All these papers were burned by the killers. No valuables or money were taken. From this, we may conclude that the perpetrators are people of some standing and that the crime was not committed for gain." "You speak of perpetrators in the plural. Then there were several of them?" asked Holmes. "Yes, there were 2. They were almost caught at the scene of the crime. We have their tracks and can even describe their appearance. I would bet 10 to 1 that we catch the fellows. One was more agile and managed to slip away without a trace, but the second was overtaken by the assistant gardener and only just escaped. This last one was of middle height and very powerfully built. He had a square jaw, a thick neck, a heavy mustache, and a mask over his face." "Well, that is a rather vague description. Those features might apply even to Watson," said Holmes. The inspector grew merry and remarked, Yes, you are right. Those features do indeed fit Dr. Watson." Holmes, smiling, shook his head. "I am sorry to refuse you, Lestrade, but I truly cannot help you," he said. "The fact is, I knew this man Milverton, and always considered him one of the most dangerous men in London. There are, Lestrade, crimes that the law cannot reach. There are cases where we must acknowledge the right of private individuals to settle accounts with their enemies. Do not argue with me, please. I have already formed a definite view on this matter. My sympathies lie with the criminals, not their victim. No, indeed, I will have nothing to do with this case." Throughout the morning, Holmes did not breathe a word to me about the bloody events we had witnessed. He was deep in thought, his eyes vacant and unseeing. It was evident he was straining his memory, trying to recall something. We were sitting at lunch when suddenly he sprang up and cried, "By Jove, Watson, I have it. I remember it now. Get your hat and follow me." He hurried out into the street and strode down Baker Street. Passing Oxford Street, we found ourselves near Regent Circus. To the left was a stationer's shop, in whose window were displayed photographs of famous people and beauties of the day. Holmes's eyes were fixed upon one of these cards. Following his gaze, I saw the portrait of a stately and beautiful lady in court dress. Upon her head sparkled a high diamond tiara. I looked closely. Yes, it was her face. the face of the mysterious stranger who had shot Milverton. The same handsome, aquiline nose, the same thick brows and compressed-in lips, the same firm, small chin. With bated breath, I read the caption beneath the portrait. It was the wife of one of the greatest nobles and statesmen in England. I looked at Holmes, but he pressed a finger to his lips, and we walked away.